Welcome everyone. We're just waiting a couple of seconds as people kind of flow into the Zoom room here, and then we'll get started in 20 or 30 seconds or so. So I think we'll start. Hi, my name is Charlie Berger. Welcome to this week's Analytics and Data Oracle User Community TechCast. I think we've got a good one for you. We've got Jon Mead from Rittman Mead, CEO of Rittman Mead, and I'll introduce him in just a minute. But I want to go through some of the logistics and housekeeping and things like that before we pass it over to him and do a quick introduction for Jon. So hi, my name is Charlie Berger. I'll be your host for today's session. In about 35 minutes or so, we'll try to cover everything, and we try to keep these things quick and focused, but very technical, and we try to recruit great speakers like Jon to come onto our stage and share their knowledge and expertise. So I am associated with Oracle as both a product manager for Oracle Machine Learning, but also I happen to be one of the co-founders of this, hardworking, active community of Oracle technical professionals who focus on analytics and data. So we welcome you to join us for this thing. We think we've got an active, useful group, and these TechCasts are core to that. So right about now, I'm supposed to be saying that we're going to have Jon present. There's going to be a Q&A afterwards. If you have an urgent question or so, I may interrupt him. Just type it into the chat window, or actually into the Q&A. Actually type it into the Q&A, and I may interrupt him from time to time. You're okay with that, Jon, right? If I interrupt you?
Absolutely, yeah.
All right, good. And then we also want to take this opportunity to encourage you to do what Jon's doing, to come out on stage and share some of your knowledge and your expertise. We have a web link there where you can submit your abstract proposal, or just send us an email or something. We also have a Slack channel you can put things in there, and we have a team of us volunteers that review these, sort of judges, and we try to pick and pull out the best and put them on stage for you. So everybody knows something. You may not know everything, but you know some pieces or something that other people would find useful, and that's what this is all about. It's about sharing knowledge. Somewhere along the course of this whole thing, we're going to have Carrie, who's also not on camera, I guess, right now. But she is going to share a bunch of useful links that Jon has given us that you can click on for follow-up on different things. We're also going to record this, so if you do, ask any questions or anything like that, it's being recorded, and then we post these things online for you to access on the same website or on YouTube, on the Analytics and Data YouTube channel. Jon, could you go to the next slide, please?
There you go.
All right. So we have a whole series of these things. They're all out there on the website. Just scroll down and you'll find them all. The last one was Irvin McFadden, who did absolutely a great job on a fantasy football thing just prior to the Super Bowl. And so you can watch that. It was a lot of fun. Really enjoyed that. Coming up next, right after this, will be February 5th, 16, 17, and 18, our Analytics and Data TechCast days, where we have a whole day dedicated to 3 hours, that is, on day 1, the 16th, to machine learning, day 2 to spatial and graph, and day 3, the Thursday, the 18th, on analytics. But it's not just analytics, it's analytics plus. So it's like analytics, make a pie chart, but do something else cooler beyond that. So we always try to focus on those 3 different tracks. We have another one coming up, and I think it's in May sometime. I think we may have that on another slide, but all the past presentations are there. Jon, can you go to the next slide, please?
Oh, gone the wrong way. There we go.
And also, so this is at save the date for February 16, 17, 18. So I just shared that. If you go to the links, you'll see the lineup. I know for machine learning, we have the UK National Healthcare System. I'm going to be previewing some new features and functions of machine learning. We have a panel discussion, and then the other guys have similar kind of tracks. So you can go read that. Next slide, please, Jon. And we also have set up a Slack channel. So if you follow these links, you can go there. You can ask any questions. We try to have this be a little bit like Stack Overflow. And so you can also announcements, things like that there. You can go to subscribe to the newsletter. It's free. We're also on LinkedIn. We're on Twitter and Facebook. So there's a lot of different ways to work with us. Next slide, please. Okay, so here's where I'm going to introduce Jon. So Jon, we're thrilled to have him. He's the founder and CEO of Rittman Mead Consulting. He's been around for more than 25 years, software engineer, consultant, contractor. He's seen it all, and he is here to talk to us about metadata. So Jon, thank you for coming onto our TechCast stage, and over to you.
Charlie, thanks for the intro, and obviously thanks for having me. By way of an intro to me, I guess, as Charlie said, I grew up and have spent quite a lot of time working either as a sort of consultant contractor or in the sort of data analytics, data warehousing, business intelligence, or whatever the sort of terminology was around the time, around that space. Mead itself is an Oracle partner. We were founded in 2007 and have really since then specialized in, I think the terms we used at the time were business intelligence and data warehousing. And I think that's sort of evolved into data engineering, data science, analytics, and various sort of nuances on that. But ultimately, sort of collecting data for the purposes of either sort of reporting or predicting, so looking back or looking forward, and then sort of presenting, publishing that data into, sort of organizations. And I guess, this being a data and analytics user community, hopefully that sounds or resonates with most people here. And the other thing we've really tried to do through the kind of life of the company is sort of, sort of engage in the community. We've got a blog that's been running, since the year dot that, has got a lot of sort of technical insight into initially OBIE, some of the data warehousing technologies, OAC, OAS. We've always had, sort of our members of staff have always spoken at various events. And I think, sort of user groups and community groups like this are sort of fundamental to, and in a way that, obviously getting projects and things done, but also sort of enjoying working in this area. So, hopefully we can kind of put back into that as well. So what I'm going to talk about a little bit today is really comes from, I suppose, the best way to start is by looking at kind of where we are today and sort of looking at effectively the sort of current state, what the situation, what we find in the world in sort of data and analytics sort of projects at the moment. There's been quite a change over the last 5 years. There is definitely, there's a million graphs out there. Data volumes have changed. There's more data and better tooling for people to do it. Through that, I think end users are sort of being able to, sort of embed more complexity in terms of reporting. There's greater access to a broader range of systems. There's access to cloud systems, there's access to on-premise systems. In some cases, the kind of cost and overhead, partly through the sort of, cloud technologies of, sort of collecting data and then analyzing data, has massively reduced. And this is, the sort of, you hear terms about the sort of democratization of sort of analytics and data. And sort of all of this is really, sort of empowered kind of users a lot. There's examples of things like the citizen data scientist. So now, sort of through tools like DV, I can start to actually sort of run, sort of simplified versions of models. So again, as I guess an analyst, a power user, as someone who, consumes data and would want to interpret that data and present that to the business, that is, sort of, I think the way the way the industry has changed over the last, I'll say 5, but sort of many years, it's been fantastic. I've got a lot more power. Hand in hand with that, people have started to sort of mention data governance more. There's some really obvious things in Europe, the GDPR ruling. I know California had a sort of similar ruling, and I'm sure, across the US, there will be, sort of data protection rulings, and the ability to do anything with anyone's data is sort of fantastic. But, sort of on the other side of that, the world always works in a sort of pendulum type way. There's always this kind of idea that, yeah, that's really great and it's really powerful, but that could be really invasive. Or if you have data protection, sort of that could really easily, sort of enable you to identify individuals when, in some very sensitive situations. So, we've kind of got, sort of different scenarios kind of coming together at the moment. This, I mean, it's obviously sort of good, but it can lead to some issues. So, really this has come a little bit from our experience of clients with fairly mature OBIE, OAC, analytics, different kinds of reporting systems, and looking at how their user communities are sort of facing this or looking at this at the moment. And sort of like, this is a sort of list of sort of things that sort of will come up in terms of sort of analysis or conversation. Someone wants to create a report of costs, and it's like, oh, look, there's multiple items of cost. Do we want this cost measure or this cost measure? And how kind of, if you take OBIE, how the RPD can sort of evolve and grow over time. So, this can lead to sort of misconstrued or misunderstood metrics getting put into reports. Additionally, then this can sort of be amplified as reports are then built through these sort of metrics, either through misunderstanding or people who are consuming the reports potentially not understanding the kind of metrics and maybe other sort of data items that were sort of involved in there. Sort of hand in hand with that, with the sort of nuance or the arrival of data exploration, we've got a situation now where, again, the kind of innocent mashup or being able to create data models on the fly, again, is sort of very empowering, very fantastic. But again, we've found situations where, sort of power users are going to very complicated, say, ERP systems and sort of rebuilding data models that have already been built in sort of more classic reporting systems, and that has the chance of sort of you're just potentially wasting time because you're repeating work, but secondly there's a chance for errors in there. This is third normal form systems are difficult, and working out all the joins is complicated. So that's another consideration that now we need to look at. As I mentioned earlier, there's this sort of democratization of data science. So, you can have models in there. And I know Charlie in particular is a big advocate, and, a lot of the work he does is sort of promoting, the not the accessibility, but, sort of the availability of machine learning to, people using, or people who have access to data. And again, models can add another layer of complexity in terms of, it's easy to stuff some numbers in, but what do I really infer from that, and can I make sense of it? So I think kind of where this can lead is some sort of questions in terms of, okay, it's great, we have much more empowerment, but at the same time, does that lead to a situation where we can sort of lead to some issues? For example, we can end up with time wasted in data analysis because we're continually reinventing the wheel, or different people are doing things, incorrect data being presented to stakeholders, or the stakeholders incorrectly kind of interpreting reports, or maybe worse still, people not really just understanding the data. And coming back to that example of a cost or a sales measure, people just think, I can see three things saying sales. I'm going to just download the data and put it in Excel and sort of work it out myself, kind of thing, which again, just circumventing the whole kind of system. And I think from the organization point of view, there's this sort of other dimension. So there's a kind of user empowerment side of things, and how useful the system is. And then you kind of overlay or go alongside that, this sort of idea of data government. So all of these things are, I know, maybe frustrations or issues to sort of individual users, but then there's a whole sort of sway, the sort of organizational side to this in terms of, from a risk point of view or from a compliance point of view, has an independent set of issues. But just the sort of focus with this is really, this can then lead to sort of poor user engagement. So if I can't use the system properly, or I don't understand it, or I don't understand the data in it, or I don't understand the outputs from it, again, come back to this circumnavigation. It's like, okay, what do I do with this? And again, I think we've all broadly been around systems that, somewhere in there, the right data is held, but there's a generally kind of bad feeling about the system. It's bloated, it's complicated, it takes too long, I can never find what I want, etc., etc. So the kind of question is there a better way? And what this presentation is sort of looking at an idea using Oracle technology that's sort of fairly adjacent to the Oracle analytics tools, to sort of come up with maybe a solution to this. So some kind of catalog or dictionary. So there's a bit of a caveat, and I should have really put an asterisk on this slide. Oracle does have a product called Data Catalog that is available in the cloud that I'm sure in time may address all or some of these kind of issues. So the critical thing with what we're talking about here is at the moment, it's very customized towards working with OAC or OBIE on-premise or cloud. And again, it provides some sort of individual functionality or functionality that really at the moment goes well beyond what the data catalog, sort of offered by Oracle can do. So again, it's not to disparage that in any way. It's just there was a particular set of needs that we could build through this. So this was our kind of moment, and it's like, right, wow, I think we can do something here. So what do we actually want to do? So I think there's sort of some fundamentals of what we sort of mean by a sort of data dictionary. We want to store definitions and potentially other metadata for things like columns, tables, attributes in OAC, things we see on a screen. They could be in source systems, they could be in the data warehouse, they may be, and again, as I say, in OAC, or potentially in sort of source files, other structures. One of the sort of key points was this sort of multiple objects should be able to be associated with a single definition. So one of the things that we found was, for example, if there was, an employee number or some, I guess, business definition, that there's only one of that business definition, but that field can get stored in multiple places across an organization. So we wanted to sort of go further, and it seemed to make sense, and particularly with the sort of governance point of view, to go further than just having a case of, we can just tag or have a descriptive field for every, for every attribute that we hold there. And again, this is sort of borne out in the slide here that we've got, so we've got the concept of definitions. And one object can be associated with a definition, and one definition can be associated with multiple objects. And at the bottom here, we wanted also to support sort of custom attributes. Different organizations have different sort of additional data. Some of it's fairly simple in terms of source. Some of it may be lists of values related. Some of it may be more around how things were calculated. And again, there's sort of various other data. And probably, again, a good example of something that to reflect the GDPR side is whether this could be used to personally identify someone. So I have a sort of flag for personally identifiable data. The next sort of swathe of things that we'd look to do would be to support processes. So, again, what's important about this is not only that someone can just sort of write something somewhere, but that there's potentially an approval process for that. If everyone can just go and update definitions, then okay, it's great. We can all put text in there, but how do we really have any idea of what's there? We also found that a lot of organizations had started various initiatives around this. So, people had Excel and some of the systems would put stuff in Excel, or sometimes comments and other things have been used actually in the data dictionary in the database, or stored with metadata in the database. So again, it was sort of critical to provide mechanisms to try to sort of suck up or incorporate, sort of anything that was there. And then finally, one thing that, again, coming back to the kind of governance point of view, reusing authorization schemes was sort of referring to the fact that if someone, especially we found through OAC, if someone couldn't see something in OAC, then probably they shouldn't see it in the data dictionary. And this actually became quite sort of subjective and involved quite a lot of discussion in quite a few cases, because, if someone couldn't see it, is that a good or a bad thing? Kind of thing. Well, should they be given permission? Because maybe if they're given permission, then they may use it and not request that thing from the development team or something. So I'm not saying I'm not sure there's a sort of black and white answer to this. Finally, there's then a sort of completing of the cycle, which was then firstly to allow users to sort of query the attributes and definitions. So the system should really work as a sort of standalone system. So I can just go into some kind of search dialogue, and I can talk about I can see, for example, sales. Now, also, if I say search for sales, there's maybe contextual information that can be displayed with sales that give me an indication of which measure that is, or what reports are using it, what other reports are using it, for example, or which kind of users use it. So again, I think one of the ideas you could extend this to is almost start to build a sort of Google PageRank kind of concept to, sort of to drive or to help sort of users query and search the metadata and find data items that are, sort of better or more suited to their role, or they're more likely to actually want to use. So again, the whole kind of, sort of data exploration side of it, I think again is sort of critical. And again, coming back to sort of tools like DV, there's a kind of question of generally sort of where do you start, really? It's like, all right, I've got an information request. I need to find information on, sort of what, how effective our marketing campaigns would be, and again, part of maybe the idea of the data dictionary is to provide an initial starting point to that. What data sets do we have that may help ask that question? Then specifically to OAC, we wanted to try and then overlay definitions back onto reports and to address the issue where people were not necessarily able to, sort of an end user got a report and they weren't able to sort of interpret that correctly. And then by bringing in additional OAC metadata around permissions, the structure of the web catalog, the structure of the RPD, then also provide a sort of bi-directional sort of audit of things like permissions to then give for a user, what can they see in terms of sort of reports and dashboards, and then going on from those reports and dashboards through the RPD down to the sort of physical attributes. So again, this is sort of tied to the kind of the partly driven from the sort of development teams, but partly understanding, sort of if you have an attribute where it's used, what kind of users can see it. So again, it's just to sort of, provide that sort of depth of information on it. So the kind of question is how this could be done. And again, a sort of very simple sort of schematic of what we're trying to achieve really is you've got on the left-hand side, like every good data warehousing diagram, your kind of sources for this system. So you have the data warehouse and various other potentially relational sources, other file sources potentially, and OAC or other kind of maybe application type systems. And the key sort of steps are you really want to load those attributes. So the columns, the OAC columns, tables, data structures from there into a database that is the data dictionary. You need an application running on top of that really performs broadly two roles. Firstly, you need a sort of definition and approval functionality for end users. And secondly, you need a sort of search, and coming back to the sort of, sort of where do I begin writing this report kind of thing, you need a search functionality. Finally, you get this sort of two-way feed back into OAC. So definitions can be published back through there. So in terms of looking at tooling to build something like this, we very quickly came to Apex. We were using, sort of cloud infrastructure. It can be run, if needs be on an autonomous data warehouse or any other cloud instance. So you can reuse existing infrastructure. And it turns out quite a lot of people that work in, sort of ETL have pretty good PL SQL skills. And although part of the Apex community is sort of, I guess, born out of, sort of forms and more the sort of application side of it, it's a lot easier to give people that knew like a SQL, PL SQL, something like Apex than it would do to sort of start putting things together in Node or something like that. So the steps to do it were to sort of load columns, attributes that you want to hold definitions against. And again, this was sort of fairly straightforward. We could build PL SQL routines. We could build, again, from databases, Excel, things like that. And then for the RPD itself, the client admin tool provides some command line tools to export that into Excel. And then once it's been exported into Excel, it can be loaded into the database or a database XML object. And then the sort of tree walked and the relationships sort of built, the relationships extracted from that and pushed into a data model that can show the sort of relationships between the source objects themselves and the sort of downstream metadata. Next step was to allow users to define the attributes, which was provided through this sort of, obviously an application running on the database that I said was sort of Apex. And the kind of functionality that we wanted was, to be able to query, and this was the search, the list of objects, to look at lists of definitions, associate them, edit definitions, edit various objects, and again, just set data and metadata about objects. And probably the kind of critical bit was this sort of approve and reject changes. So again, to try and make it align with the sort of data governance side of life, what we were kind of looking at was there was not everyone can edit definitions or assign definitions. And if you could do that, you didn't automatically, or they weren't automatically published. They would go through an approval queue, and there were a set of approvers that could then decide whether your changes were in line with, which other data policies or, whichever, roles data owners existed across the organization. So it gave a lot of control to the organization or to organizations about how to use this. In terms of the Apex screens themselves, there were a lot of built-in functionality. It was relatively quick to get the fundamentals of it up and running. We used, if I can get the drawing on screen working, we used things like the faceted search, get a bigger line, things like the faceted search over here, which again made it very easy to effectively base a query on either a table or a view, and then provide fairly customizable and quick to develop functionality to allow users to search and retrieve information back from it. Actually, I'll just clear that, clear my drawings. In addition to that, again, we had sort of ways of sort of adding definitions. And again, a kind of, this was a representation of the sort of approval process here. So, yeah, I mean, I think the key thing about using Apex was it provided a lot of out-of-the-box functionality that I think in another world would have had to sort of be kind of built ground up.
Hey, John, we got a question here. Maybe you want to field it on the fly. Can you share the commands for RPD?
Yes, please. If we can collect an email at the end, I can do that.
Great, thanks.
Sorry, I've got too many windows on my screen. Let me just go back. So yeah, the next step on this was publishing the results back to the reporting tool, which was this sort of leg of the diagram here. What we wanted to do was to make the definitions available in OAC. We used dynamic presentation layer descriptions and hover over text to help users. We're also aware that people printed reports and dashboards, and things like hover over doesn't work particularly well if in a sort of printing scenario. So we also provided effectively a patch to the RPD, so you could actually directly build out, if you imagine a sort of report underneath your report. So you would have your report on top, and then you could actually go use the RPD to go straight into the data dictionary to pull out the definitions and have a list of definitions that were associated with the report that was above that on a dashboard. And again, that was more of a kind of, it was just different use cases and how people were using the system. One important element to this was to use common identity provider with OAC. So, sort of the login to both systems was, sort of in this case was provided by IDCS. And so that you didn't, there was seamless interaction between the two systems. So again, here, the users and groups and everything were defined and pulled from the OAC, or pulled, really defined as they would be for OAC, and then the data dictionary was able then to sort of to read those and then assign sort of any sort of authorization schemas within those. But again, the key thing really from it was that there was a sort of seamless integration. And I mentioned the kind of hover over text, and again for that we used sort of custom description here. We populated session variables on logon to the system, and then they can kind of get pulled back here, and then you would get the kind of mouse over text here. And again, there's a limitation in terms of how much data you can bring back in that. I mean, physically there is actually a character limit on that, but so from a kind of usability point of view, you don't want to put too much stuff in there as well. So again, all of that was doable through sort of the OAC or OBIE admin tool. Final thing was a sort of deeper exploration of the OAC metadata. And it's got a bit more complicated in the extracts. So we wanted to explore OAC metadata, expose it through DV, look at things like lineage. And again, this sort of bidirectional sort of security of who can see what and the relationships between objects. And again, for this, we ended up pulling things like the users and groups out of IDCS, things like the web catalog, usage tracking data, and putting that, effectively layering that on top of what we already had from the XML representation of the RPD, to give really a kind of end-to-end view. So we could then say, well, we understand the RPD now. So we understand from the sort of presentation layer through to the physical layer. If we had something in the presentation layer, what effectively database field it would come from, and then through the web catalog, we could then tie that into for the reports and dashboards, which attributes in the presentation layer were used, and then for the users and groups, we can start to look at, okay, well, which users and groups have access to sort of various, various of those either reports and dashboards or various elements within the presentation layer. And again, it enabled us to sort of use the things like the tree diagram and the network diagrams in DV to perform some analysis, and again to sort of be able to sort of drag things around and sort of build on the fly lineage to sort of be able to do that. The data can explode, and by that I mean that if you sort of start to multiply out the number of users, the number of groups, the number of this, the number of that, you can easily get in a situation that you've got sort of fairly, I don't know, maybe not millions, but sort of several 100,000 rows of data. So yeah, again, sort of optimizing that for this kind of visualization needs a bit of thought as well, because it can be fairly intensive both on the front end and back end. So that was it. That was the goal. In terms of the benefits, we ended up with better understanding of analysts, or by analysts and end users, of the data in their system, better understanding by the development team of how the data was being used. And I think this was sort of, it was, I guess the lineage gave some idea of impact analysis, but probably critically, the kind of goal was, in some ways, or the unstated goal was not to put another, and I use costs as an example, and it wasn't costs, but not to create another cost measure when there was probably one that would do. So there was just this sort of better understanding between the end users and the development team of what the meaning of the data in the RPD was, which had this, then the sort of knock-on effect of it actually sort of brought those two communities together a bit, and also gave a kind of a better link up in terms of, okay, we don't have to continue to sort of reinvent or put in these sort of development requests sort of continually for the exact measure that I want. And then sort of the data governance side, as I said, there was this sort of sort of not parallel, but well, I guess it was parallel kind of initiative for the organization. It enabled an organization to sort of to put checks and checkboxes, for want of a better word, or to adhere to, or provide, sort of a demonstrable view of compliance to a number of sort of data governance sort of initiatives. And that is that. So any further questions?
Yeah, I've got a question here in the, and guys, this is your time and your opportunity to ask John anything you want, well, within reason. And so he's, one question here is, how would it work with a proposed browser-based RPD tool for OAC?
At the moment, I don't know, but there will be metadata, and I'm sure there will be either an API or a web script, sort of web service way of accessing that metadata. So I don't think it would be any more difficult, but yeah, specifically the way it would work, I don't know at the moment. Okay. But I think it's definitely possible.
We've got a question here, a comment here from Ling Jing in product management for Oracle that she's announcing, and hopefully you guys saw this already, but I'll just read it. This is from Ling. We are in the process of building OCI data catalog integration with OAC and OBIEE. If you are interested in participating in user research or beta testing, please contact Ling, and she has her emails there. So you guys can follow up with her for that.
Yeah, and just to be sort of for full disclosure, when we looked at this for a client, we did consider the data catalog at the outset. It was back a year now, and where the product was at the time wasn't, sort of wasn't ready. I'm sure if you go forward many years, or even looking at it now, I think that would, that would change. So I think that's a definite sort of watch that space. It's always better to take something off the shelf than build it.
We got a comment here. What was the need that drove you towards a custom data dictionary away from using the RPD as the hub of data dictionary? Too hard to update by multiple users?
It was initially a data warehouse initiative, and then it became much broader across the organization. So they actually wanted people who didn't have access to OAC to be able to use it. And it was quite specific in terms of it had to be an independent thing from OAC itself. OAC was definitely a feed and a consumer of it. But if some data existed in, database ABC, it didn't want to be ruled out that the data from that could be loaded into the data dictionary and metadata could be set against it. So it didn't want to be 100% defined by OAC.
Oh, here's another question. We'll wrap this up kind of quickly, guys. So get your questions in fast because we want to make sure you get back to your jobs and everything else you got to do for the day. But the next one that just came in, how do you keep this catalog up to date with ongoing development? Is there some kind of custom scripting to get OAC bar file and periodic update?
Yeah, it is not possible to automate the download of the bar file. So we actually integrated into the release process. So at the moment, that was more manual. Unless someone on this webinar knows how, and I'd be very interested if they did, but we didn't find a way of automating the download of the bar file. So we tied it more to the sort of development process. Things like the catalog, it actually worked to get around some of the security things. A lot of the pulling the information from the sort of web catalog auditing was better done in offline mode, which again required, the easiest way to do that was extract from the bar file. So again, it wasn't perfect. It would be nice to sort of connect online, but then you can't get to the users folders. So again, there were some limitations around that in terms of what we found. Okay,
great. I think we should probably kind of take this in for a close now. What I was going to say was we have the Slack channel. So I think John will be possibly finding some things to the Slack channel there, and you can just keep this dialogue going, back and forth out there as a little bit of the hope. John, I'm going to share my screen just for a minute to kind of close out with what I want to share. I want to share the website just to kind of call everyone's attention to, where is it here? If I get this guy out of the way. Can't do that. Not here, right here, I think. So this was the latest presentation you just saw. We're updating the future TechCast. We've got one, I think, on the 23rd. The dates and the exact ones I don't have in front of me. We're still updating the website, but I know we've got one on OAC and the latest uptake and integration with the machine learning functions. Philippe Leon's going to come back on stage for that. We've got, I think we've got Dan Blamis on talking about the latest OAC updates that are coming up. We've got Graph Studio, I think it is, coming on with their latest updates. We've got a few different things that we're just going to be updating here. So keep an eye for that. The other big event that's coming up is the TechCast Days. So again, these are free. So oh, by the way, while I'm here, we'll also come back to this website. We're going to have like merchandise. Okay, so you can buy your own mugs and your phone covers and stickers and mouse pads and all sorts of cool shirts, things like that. So we're trying out a little bit of sort of logoized merchandise. So come back for that. The TechCast Days are the next big event. We have a machine learning day, spatial and location day. We're kind of having this fun Star Wars versus Star Trek theme. So if you see people wearing costumes or doing silly things or cracking Star Wars versus Star Trek jokes and stuff, that's what's going on there. Just trying to make it a little bit more lively. We've got a bunch of different talks here by different people coming in. Yeah, I won't bore you with asking you to read all those things. You can go down here and read the actual, here's the Spatial Studio coming on. This is just a teaser. We're going to do a more in-depth version of that later on. So there's a lot of good talks coming up for that. Register early because we're finding where bandwidth is sometimes a little challenge there. So make sure you register early there. And that's all I had for here. Unless you have anything else, John, I wanted to thank our speaker, thank our organizers, Carrie, and everyone else that's a volunteer for the Analytics Data user community. And anything else, John?
No, there was a question about the RPD extract. If someone can email that to me, I'll get back to them.
Excellent. All right, everyone, thank you very much for attending, and we'll see you in the next Tech